The wind was screaming that night, dragging sheets of snow across the empty road like torn pieces of a forgotten world. Officer Hale could barely see past the beam of his patrol SUV, but something in his chest kept pulling at him, a tight, unexplainable instinct that tonight was not like the others. Beside him, Shadow, his trained German shepherd, kept shifting in the seat, ears twitching, body tense, as if he too felt the night hiding something. The storm swallowed sound, swallowed direction, swallowed hope, until only the soft, frantic thud of Hale's heartbeat was left guiding him through the white darkness. Then, cutting through the wind, came a sharp bark, not from Shadow, but from somewhere out in the storm, a sound too desperate, too raw to ignore. Hale slammed the brakes. Shadow was already whining, pawing at the door, ready to leap out. And in that split second, as the snow swirled in mad circles and the cold crawled beneath Hale's skin, he realized this wasn't just a stray dog or a lost animal. There was fear in that cry, human fear. Somewhere out there, buried beneath the storm, someone small was calling for help and running out of time. The storm had a strange way of swallowing the world whole, not slowly, not gently, but in a single breath, as if the sky had grown tired of letting people see too much. Officer Hale had driven through winter nights before, but this one pressed on him differently. It wasn't the cold, though it seeped through the seams of his gloves like needles. It wasn't the silence either, though it carried a certain loneliness that seemed too large for a single night. It was the feeling, that tight pull in his chest, the one that officers learned to respect long before they learned to name it, instinct. A whisper under the ribs, a warning in the bloodstream. Shadow, his German shepherd partner, felt it first. Hale noticed the change in him even before the storm reached its full rage. The dog sat stiff in the passenger seat, ears angled forward, nose twitching at something beyond the glass. His breath fogged the window in uneven bursts, almost impatient, almost anxious. Hale glanced at him, frowning. "What is it, boy?" But Shadow didn't look back. He stared into the snow like he was tracking a ghost. The wipers scraped across the windshield, fighting the blizzard's grip. Hale slowed the SUV, his heartbeat tapping unevenly against his ribs. The world outside was nothing but white, rolling waves of snow, bitter wind, and the distant shape of pine trees bending like tired giants. Nights like this were meant for staying home. Nights like this were meant for warm lights and closed doors. Yet Hale was out here, pulled by a call he hadn't even received, driven by nothing but a sense that something was deeply wrong. Then it happened. A sound so thin, so broken, that at first he thought it was just another branch cracking under the weight of ice. But Shadow jerked upright, ears stabbing toward the darkness. The dog let out a low, urgent whine, the kind he only used when something was desperately wrong. Hale held his breath. The wind roared, but beneath it, faint as a whisper trapped inside a memory, came a cry. Not an animal, not a storm sound. A child. Hale's foot slammed the brake before the thought fully formed. The SUV skidded slightly before finding traction, and both he and Shadow lurched forward, bracing themselves as the vehicle settled into the snow. For one suspended moment, there was nothing. No cry, no sound, only the heavy, icy quiet of the storm. But that silence was worse. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting. Then the cry came again, muffled, weak, as if someone was calling from beneath the ground. Shadow barked sharply, a command more than a request, and Hale knew they had seconds, not minutes, to act. He threw the door open. The cold exploded against him, a violent slap of wind and frozen air. Snow stung his face, clung to his uniform, seeped instantly through the fibers. Shadow leapt from the SUV, paws disappearing in deep drifts as he landed. Hale reached for his flashlight, Just hold on for me." Shadow barked once, turning toward the direction they'd come, guiding the way back through the storm. And as Hale stepped into the swirling snow with the boy clutched against his chest, he realized something with a clarity sharper than the wind. Tonight wasn't about patrol. Tonight wasn't coincidence. Tonight was the night he was meant to find this child, or lose him forever. Warmth did not return quickly. Even inside the SUV, even with the heater blasting on high, the boy felt frighteningly weightless in Hale's arms, as if cold had hollowed him out from the inside. Hale laid him gently across the back seat while Shadow climbed in beside him without waiting for a command. The dog pressed his body close, offering a natural heat far stronger than any machine. Hale shut the door fast to trap every bit of warmth inside, breath fogging the air as he circled around to the driver's seat. His hand shook on the wheel, not from the cold anymore, but from the image burned into his mind. That rusted chain, tight enough to scar, old enough to rot, cruel enough to speak stories the boy wasn't ready to tell. The storm thundered around the SUV, shaking the frame with bitter gusts, but inside there was only a small, trembling silence. Shadow nudged the boy's face, licking a frozen tear from his cheek. The child didn't lift his head. He didn't resist either. His eyes fluttered open for a moment, dark, glassy, unfocused, then slipped shut again. Hale watched through the rearview mirror, his chest tightening with every slow rise and fall of the child's chest. "Stay with me, buddy," he whispered, voice softer than he intended. "We're getting you help. Just hold on." But the boy didn't move. Hale swallowed hard. Training told him to stay calm. Instinct told him this child had already endured more than most adults ever would. The chain had been wrapped twice, maybe 3 times. The padlock wasn't random junk. It had been chosen. The whole setup wasn't some accident or childish mistake. Someone had chained this boy deliberately, in the middle of winter, in the middle of nowhere, during a storm that could kill grown men. Hale tightened his grip on the wheel. Whoever did this didn't want him found. He flicked on the lights, red and blue cutting violently through the snow, then hit the siren just long enough to alert any nearby units. The SUV lurched forward, tires fighting the drifts. Every bump made the boy's body shift, and each time Shadow instinctively adjusted, positioning himself so the child stayed cushioned and warm. As the car pushed through the storm, Hale grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I have a found juvenile male, approximately 7 years old, hypothermic, unconscious but breathing. Severe exposure, possible abuse situation. Child was found chained at an abandoned structure near mile marker 42. I need EMS ready on arrival." Static crackled before the operator responded. "A copy, Unit 12. Ambulance is en route to County General. Proceed with caution. Roads are unstable." "Roger that." But even after the transmission ended, Hale didn't lower the radio. His hand hovered there a moment longer, fingers trembling. A quiet anger simmered beneath his ribs. Not wild, not impulsive, but deep, steady, driven by the kind of injustice that claws at a man long after the shift ends. He looked at the mirror again. Shadow had pressed his forehead against the child's chest, as if listening to his heartbeat. Hale felt something twist inside him. He had seen Shadow work with injured civilians before. He was trained for trauma, for panic, for blood. But this gentleness was different. There was sorrow in the way Shadow lay beside the boy, sorrow and a strange protectiveness that softened the dog's entire posture. Hale forced himself to focus on the road. The storm blurred the world into shades of white and gray. Headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the blizzard, just enough sight to keep moving. In the distance, the faint glow of town lights flickered like distant lanterns, unreachable but comforting. Minutes passed. Long, fragile minutes that felt like they were balancing on a thin wire between survival and loss. Then a quiet sound broke through the silence, a small, weak gasp. Hale jerked his eyes to the mirror so fast it hurt. The boy's fingers twitched. His lips parted slightly, breath forming a tiny cloud of condensation above his mouth. Shadow lifted his head, ears pricked, tail tapping the seat in cautious hope. Hale exhaled a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're doing good. You're safe now." But safe was a word that didn't seem to fit this child. The boy's eyes blinked open slowly, as if each movement required strength he barely had. He stared ahead at nothing, pupils large and lost. "Hey," Hale said softly. "Can you hear me?" The boy didn't speak. Instead, his gaze shifted, landing on Shadow for a brief moment. Something in his expression wavered, a flicker of relief or disbelief or both, before his eyelids fluttered and closed again. Hale felt a sting behind his eyes. He blinked it away. The boy needed warmth, safety, medical care. And beyond all that, he needed someone who could look at him without fear, without pity, without judgment. Hale didn't know why he felt that so strongly, but he did. Something about the child had carved its way into him the moment he saw that change. A few minutes later, the hospital's emergency lights appeared through the snow, glowing red, sharp, urgent. Hale pulled into the bay, waving down the paramedics already running toward him. Snow blasted in as he opened the back door. "He's severely hypothermic," Hale said, voice tightening. "A found chained. Possible trauma. He needs, we've got him," the medic interrupted, though gently. They slid the boy onto a stretcher, covering him with thermal blankets, checking his pulse and pupil response. When they moved him away from Shadow, something unexpected happened. The boy whimpered, the same broken sound Hale had heard in the storm. Shadow tried to follow, whining anxiously. Hale grabbed the leash but kept his grip loose. The dog didn't want to cause trouble. He just didn't want to lose the child he had kept alive with body heat. The medics noticed. The dog walked beside him, one said. It's helping stabilize him emotionally. Just stay out of the sterile zone. Hale nodded, relief softening his tense jaw. As they rushed the boy down the hallway, Shadow padded alongside the stretcher, gaze locked on the child. And Hale followed, step by step, unable to walk away. Something about that small, cold hand, barely visible beneath the blankets, held him in place as strongly as any chain could. Inside the trauma room, everything moved fast. Warm Rofi fluids, oxygen mask adjustments, vitals stabilizing and slipping and stabilizing again. Hale stood in the doorway, fingers tapping his thigh, breath uneven. He wasn't supposed to stay. Protocol said rescuers should clear out once medical teams took over. But every time he tried to step back, something inside refused. Maybe it was because he'd found the boy. Maybe it was because no child should wake up alone. Maybe it was because he couldn't shake the image of that chain in the snow. Or maybe, though he didn't want to admit it, it was because some rescues don't end when the child is found. Some rescues begin there. And as Shadow finally curled beside the stretcher, never taking his eyes off the boy, Hale knew this wasn't a single night story. It was the beginning of something far deeper. The hospital room hummed with the quiet, relentless rhythm of machines. Soft beeps, muted airflow, the faint swish of heated blankets being adjusted. It was a strange contrast to the violence of the storm outside, as if the world had split into two vastly different realities, one filled with chaos, the other with a fragile, trembling hope. Hale stood near the doorway, leaning against the frame with exhaustion settling into his bones, snow still melting off his jacket in tiny drops that tapped against the linoleum floor. Shadow lay on the tiles beside the bed, head resting on his paws, watching the boy with an alertness that went beyond instinct. It felt like devotion. The child's tiny body was almost lost beneath layers of warming blankets and V lines. His skin remained pale, almost translucent under the fluorescent lights. The medical team had worked in a flurry when he arrived, voices sharp with urgency and hands moving with practiced precision. Now the room had fallen into a heavy quiet, the kind that feels like it's waiting, holding itself steady while a life decides which direction it will tilt. Hale approached the bedside slowly, afraid that even his footsteps might disrupt the fragile calm. The boy's breaths came shallow, fluttering like something unsure of its place in the world. Shadow's tail thumped once as Hale sat down, but the dog didn't take his eyes off the child. Hale reached out and rested a gentle hand on the blanket near the boy's arm, a silent offering of presence more than comfort. He whispered, "You're safe now. We've got you." The boy didn't stir, but his eyelashes trembled slightly, as if some distant part of him heard and wanted to respond but didn't yet know how. A nurse entered quietly, checking the 4 and jotting something on her chart before stepping back. She lowered her voice when she spoke to Hale, her tone soft but edged with the seriousness of someone who had seen too many near. His core temperature is still dangerously low," she said. "We're doing everything we can. The next few hours will tell us a lot." Hale nodded, though the words settled in him like cold stones. His eyes drifted back to the child. His chest tightened at the bruises faintly visible near the neckline of the hospital gown, the small cuts on the wrists, the way his hands curled inward as though trying to protect something that had already been taken from him. Shadow suddenly rose, stepping closer to the bed, ears pricked and body tense. Hale blinked, leaning forward. Then he saw it. The boy's fingers twitching, small movements that looked like they were reaching for something. Shadow whined softly, placing his head near the child's hand. The boy's fingers brushed the soft fur, recoiling slightly at first, then trembling forward again until they rested fully on Shadow's head. The moment was so delicate, so heartbreakingly fragile, that Hale felt his throat constrict. It was the first voluntary movement the boy had made since the rescue. Shadow stayed perfectly still, allowing that tiny hand to settle, to explore the warmth and softness that must have felt like the opposite of the icy world he had come from. The boy's breathing changed, steadier, deeper, as if some part of him recognized safety in the dog's presence. For the first time in hours, hope slipped into Hale's chest. Minutes passed like that, slow and quiet. The world outside might as well have disappeared. Inside the room, everything centered around a small hand clinging to a German shepherd's fur and a boy finding his first thread of connection. Eventually, the child's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, darting around as if unsure of where he was or how he had gotten there. His gaze landed on Shadow, then drifted upward toward Hale. When their eyes met, something inside the boy recoiled, a flash of fear, the sudden panic of someone who had learned not to trust adults, especially unfamiliar ones. Hale lifted both hands slowly, palms open, showing he meant no harm. "Hey," he whispered. "Oh, okay. You're safe. I promise. You're in a hospital. You're warm. We're not going to hurt you." The boy's breath hitched. His throat bobbed in a dry swallow, lips parting as if he wanted to speak, but the words had been locked somewhere painful. Shadow nudged his arm gently. The boy latched onto the dog's fur again, body trembling, but the fear didn't spike. It softened. He closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against Shadow's head, shaking with tiny silent sobs that broke Hale's heart in ways he hadn't been prepared for. Hale didn't move. He let the child cry, let him release whatever terror his small body had been trying to carry. The only sounds in the room were soft sniffles and Shadow's steady breathing, as if the dog had taken it upon himself to anchor the boy to something solid. After a few moments, the crying faded into quiet whimpers. The boy pulled back slightly, lifting his face. Tears streaked across his cheeks, carving warm paths through the cold residue of trauma. His voice finally emerged, hardly more than a breath, a cracked whisper that carried the weight of someone who had been silenced far too long. "Don't take him away." Hale felt the words like a punch to the chest. He leaned forward, speaking with absolute certainty. "No one's taking him away. You're taking him away. He's yours as long as you need him." The boy blinked, confused, as though no adult had ever spoken to him with such clarity and promise. He glanced down at Shadow with something like disbelief, as if trying to comprehend that something so gentle, so loyal, was allowed to stay by his side. "He found me," the boy whispered, "in the snow." "He did," Hale said softly, "and he wasn't going to leave without you." A fragile silence followed, broken only when the boy's eyes welled again. Not with fear this time, but something quieter, something like relief. Hale stayed through the night. Technically, he shouldn't have. Officers had procedures, protocols, reports to file. But every time he thought about leaving, he saw the chain, the bruises, the way the boy had clung to Shadow like the last warm thing in his world. So he remained seated beside the bed, drifting in and out of wakefulness as the storm outside howled against the windows. Sometime near dawn, the nurse returned with a soft smile. "His vitals are improving. It's slow, but he's stabilizing." Hale exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Shadow lifted his head and stretched, then gently curled closer to the boy again. The child, still half asleep, instinctively reached for the dog. As the first hint of morning light pressed through the blinds, the boy opened his eyes once more. His voice was soft, almost unsure, but it carried a weight that made Hale lean in. "Am I really safe now?" Hale felt something in him settle. A vow, a promise, a certainty deeper than duty. "Yes," he said. "You're safe. I'm not going anywhere. Neither is he." The boy nodded faintly, eyelids lowering as exhaustion pulled him under again. But this time he slept not out of collapse, but out of trust. And as Hale sat there watching the child breathe steadily for the first time, he realized the truth. He didn't just save a life that night. He stepped into it. And whatever story had led this boy into the storm, it wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The snow swallowed every sound as Hale carried the trembling boy toward the SUV, each step sinking into the white, unforgiving ground. The child clung to him with fingers so cold they felt weightless, like holding on to air instead of flesh. Shadow circled them, whining softly, nudging Hale's leg whenever the boy's head dipped too far, as if reminding both of them to keep moving, to stay awake, to stay alive. Hale didn't dare look down at the child too long. Every glimpse tore something open inside him, his blue lips, the small tremor in his eyelids, the way he kept whispering apologies, even though he was the one who had suffered. "You're okay now," Hale kept murmuring, though his voice cracked each time. "You're safe. I've got you." But the wind didn't care about promises. It roared harder, pushing against him as though trying to claim the boy back. By the time Hale reached the car, His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the keys. Shadow jumped in first, turning the back seat into a warm shelter with his thick fur and urgent body heat. Hale gently placed the boy beside him, wrapping him in the emergency blanket. Then Shadow pressed himself against the child without hesitation, curling around him like a living shield. Something about the boy's small hand gripping Shadow's fur made Hale pause. It wasn't a frightened grip. It was trust pure and instinctive, the kind that only children and animals understand without words. For the first time since he found him, a flicker of relief passed through Hale, but it died quickly when he noticed the bruises around the child's wrists. Deep, fresh, the kind made with intention. Hale's chest tight. It turned on the heater full blast, but the boy still shook uncontrollably, breath rattling like it fought every inhale. Hale radioed for backup, voice tight, clipped, barely containing the storm inside him. Dispatch answered, but he barely heard them. His focus stayed on the child's half-open eyes reflecting fragments of passing snow. When Hale touched his shoulder, the boy flinched so violently it felt like a knife sliding between Hale's ribs. "You're safe," he whispered again, more to calm himself than the boy. "No one will hurt you now." As the warmth finally seeped into the car, color crept slowly back into the child's cheeks. His breathing steadied just enough for him to whisper a name, "Free and Mame," in a voice so soft Hale had to lean in to hear it. Liam's next words shattered the lingering silence. He said I had to stay outside until I learned to listen. Hale closed his eyes. Anger rose like fire, enough to burn through the cold still clinging to his skin. But he swallowed it because he knew that right now Liam didn't need rage. He needed safety. He needed calm. He needed someone who saw him as a child, not a burden. Hale reached out slowly, letting Liam see every movement before he made it. "You don't have to listen to him anymore," he said. "You're with me now." Liam blinked, confused by the gentleness. His world had taught him fear, not comfort. Still, he leaned slightly toward Hale's voice, as though warmth could be borrowed through sound. Shadow lifted his head and nudged Liam's arm gently. Liam's fingers curled around a handful of fur, and for the first time a faint sigh escaped him, fragile but real. When backup finally arrived, red and blue lights cut through the white darkness like a promise. Officers approached with quiet urgency, careful not to startle Liam. Hale lifted him again, feeling how limp his body still was, how his head rested against Hale's chest as though he had no strength left to hold it up. Shadow trotted close beside them, never letting more than a step come between him and the child. The ambulance doors opened with a hiss of cold air, and the paramedics' faces shifted from professional focus to quiet disbelief when they saw Liam's condition. One of them whispered, "How is he even conscious?" Hale had no answer. He only knew that if they had arrived minutes later, Liam wouldn't have been. Inside the ambulance, the fluorescent lights painted Liam's injuries in harsh, undeniable truth. The chafed wrists, the frostbitten fingers, the pale patches on his skin where the cold had begun its cruel work. Hale stood outside the doors, fists clenched at his sides, watching as they wrapped Liam in thermal blankets and placed warm packs gently around him. Shadow sat beside Hale, ears pinned back, tail unmoving, his eyes fixed on Liam with an intensity that mirrored Hale's own. When the door shut and the ambulance began to pull away, Hale's heart twisted. His breath fogged the air, but he barely felt the cold anymore. He felt a promise forming, unspoken but absolute. He followed the ambulance to the hospital, driving through snow that looked heavier now, as though the sky itself mourned what had happened. The waiting room was warm, but an aching stillness lingered in Hale's bones. Every passing nurse felt like a countdown. Every doctor's step in the hall made his breath catch. Hours blurred, but he didn't move. He stayed exactly where he could see the doorway, as if willing Liam to walk out healthy and whole on nothing but stubborn hope. When a nurse finally approached, Hale stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. She told him Liam was stable, though still weak. They were monitoring for hypothermia complications, dehydration, and stress shock. Then she asked something that rooted Hale to the ground. "Are you family?" Hale hesitated. Legally, he wasn't. Emotionally, he had no idea what he was anymore. "I'm the one who found him," Hale said instead. She nodded and let him follow her to the recovery room. Liam lay under warm blankets, curled slightly toward the small stuffed toy the nurses had given him, a tiny plush dog. But when he saw Hale standing in the doorway, his expression changed. Not fear, not confusion. Something gentler, like recognition, warmed by the memory of being held against a heartbeat that didn't hurt him. Liam weakly lifted a hand. Hale approached slowly, sitting beside the bed, letting Liam choose the distance. Liam reached out, fingers brushing Hale's sleeve, as if checking that he was real. His eyes glistened and his voice cracked when he whispered, "Please don't leave." Hale's throat closed. He leaned forward, placing his hand over Liam's small, cold one. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised, voice softer than the snow still falling outside. He didn't say it as an officer. He said it as a man who had carried too much grief, too many broken stories, too many endings that came too late. Not this child. Not Liam. Shadow lay at Hale's feet, head resting on his paws, eyes half open but alert, watching Liam with unwavering devotion. It felt like the room itself breathed easier with all three of them inside it. Outside the hospital window, the storm had begun to calm. The snowfall softened, drifting gently instead of attacking the earth. Hale watched it for a moment, realizing the world didn't always give second chances. But sometimes when everything aligned, instinct timing, a dog's unwavering loyalty, it allowed one miracle through. Liam had survived the storm. Now came the harder part, surviving everything else. Night settled over the hospital like a heavy blanket, dimming the world to soft shadows and flickering hallway lights. Hale sat silently beside Liam's bed, the kind of silence that comes not from peace but from holding too much inside. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors blended with the faint hum of heaters working overtime. Everything else was still, except for the storm of emotions that kept circling inside him. He'd seen children in danger before. He'd rescued people from fires, accidents, violence. But something about Liam, the way he had whispered a "please don't leave" with a voice cracked by cold and fear, lodged itself deep in Hale's chest, gripping him with a responsibility he had not expected and could not ignore. Liam drifted in and out of sleep. Each time his eyes fluttered open, he checked the room with a quick, frightened glance until he found Hale or Shadow. Only then would his breath loosen, shoulders uncoil, and he'd slip back into uneasy dreams. Shadow sat with his back against Hale's leg, refusing to rest until the boy did. Every so often, he'd lift his head and touch the edge of the blanket with his nose, as if reassuring himself that Liam was still there, still warm, still alive. Hale watched this small ritual with a quiet ache. The dog understood more than most humans ever could. Hours later, a soft knock sounded at the doorway. A woman stepped inside, the social worker assigned to Liam's case. Her face carried the steady gentleness of someone used to seeing pain and trying to patch broken pieces with patience alone. "Officer Hale?" she asked quietly, not wanting to disturb the boy. Hale stood, though his eyes remained fixed on Liam. She told him what they had learned. Liam's stepfather had been taken into custody. The mother was out of state, unreachable for now. There was no immediate family for Liam to go home with. The words felt heavy, like they thickened the air in the room. Hale listened, jaw tight. Each detail made the image of the chains and the snow burn brighter in his mind. When she asked if Hale could recount everything from the rescue night, he nodded. They stepped into the hallway, leaving Shadow tucked beside Liam's bed like a silent guardian. The hallway felt colder somehow, the fluorescent lighting harsher, stripping the world of warmth. Hale's voice stayed calm as he recounted the events, but inside he relived every moment. The cry in the storm, Liam's frozen fingers, the first flinch when Hale touched his shoulder. The social worker nodded, taking careful notes, her expression never shifting into shock, though her eyes softened with each sentence. When they finished, she placed a hand on her clipboard and said, "He trusts you. That's rare, especially after something like this." Hale swallowed. He knew she wasn't wrong. He also knew trust came with weight, and that weight was already settling across his chest like a responsibility he didn't know how to hold, but also couldn't walk away from. When Hale stepped back into the room, he found Liam awake, staring up at the ceiling with wide, tired eyes. Shadow lifted his head, noticing Hale's return before Liam did. Hale sat again, and Liam slowly turned toward him, blinking as though waking from a long, confusing dream. His voice was thin when he whispered, "Are they going to send me back?" Hale's pulse stumbled. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees so he could meet Liam's gaze at eye level. "No," he said firmly. "You're not going back there." Liam stared at him, suspicion flickering like a candle against wind, the kind of cautious hope that hurt to even witness. promise?" he asked. Hale nodded once, a slow, deliberate movement. "I promise." Liam's body eased, but the relief came with tears he tried to blink away. The sound of his breath hitching was small, but devastating. Hale looked away for a moment, pretending to adjust the chair, not wanting the boy to feel ashamed. Something inside him broke and rebuilt in the same moment, like a door opening he didn't realize he'd kept shut for years. The night deepened. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting blankets, offering warm soup Liam barely touched. Hale never left the room. Shadow never moved from the bedside. Liam spoke only in fragments when awake, pieces of memories that spilled out quietly, like he was afraid saying them too loud would make them real again. He said I was too loud, so he put me outside. I tried not to cry, but the cold hurt. I thought maybe if I didn't move, he'd let me back in. Each confession was a knife. Hale didn't interrupt. He didn't push for more. He simply sat, letting Liam talk at his own pace, letting the room hold whatever the boy could. Shadow seemed to understand too. Every time Liam's voice faltered, the dog nudged his hand gently, grounding him with the warmth of fur and breath. For the first time since he was found, Liam's trembling eased. Morning crept slowly into the hospital, painting the window with pale blue light. Liam was sleeping again, finally deep, his face softened by warmth and safety. Hale watched him for a long time, noticing how small he looked against the hospital pillows, how fragile the rise and fall of his chest was, but steady, alive, healing. A doctor eventually entered, offering updates in careful tones. Liam was stable enough to leave the critical ward soon. With proper care, he'd recover physically. Emotionally, that would take time. Trauma clung in places medicine couldn't reach. Hale listened, nodding, every word deepening his resolve. When the doctor mentioned that Liam would likely have to be transferred to a temporary facility once he was released, Hale felt something inside him shift sharply, like a wall collapsing. He shouldn't be alone again, Hale said quietly. The words slipped out before he could stop them. The doctor looked at him with understanding but didn't answer. That was a decision far beyond medical authority. Still, the fact that Hale said it made the air feel different. He knew what it meant. He knew what road those words pointed toward. Hours later, when Liam woke again, the sunlight rested softly across his face, warming the curve of his cheek. He opened his eyes slowly, saw Hale, and offered a tiny, hesitant smile. The first one. It was small, almost fragile, but it held something bright beneath the surface, like a spark waiting for breath to turn into flame. He reached out, hand trembling, and touched Hale's sleeve again. Hale felt his throat close. He nodded. "Yeah," he whispered. "He's right here." Shadow placed his head gently on Liam's lap, and Liam ran weak fingers through his fur, each stroke steadying him further. The room felt warmer, softer, as though the storm outside had never existed. Hale watched them, boy and dog, and realized something undeniable. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected, something that felt dangerously close to family. And once that truth settled into Hale's heart, there was no going back. Night fell again, calmer than the last, as if the sky itself recognized the shift in fate. Liam sat up in bed, wrapped in fresh pajamas that were 2 sizes too big but impossibly soft. Hale sat beside him, reading over the final set of temporary custody forms. The weight of responsibility pressed on him, but it wasn't heavy in a way that hurt. It was heavy in a way that mattered. Liam hesitated, then spoke. Do I have to sleep alone tonight?" Hale shook his head. "No, buddy, I'll be right here." Shadow jumped onto the foot of the bed with a soft thump, curling into a protective circle around Liam's legs. The boy leaned forward, resting his cheek on the dog's back. His breathing steadied. Outside the window, the snow had softened into a gentle fall. Not sharp, not suffocating, just silent flakes drifting like feathers. Hale watched them for a moment, remembering the storm that almost stole this child. The storm that nearly buried him forever. Liam spoke again, voice muffled. "Why did you come? In the snow, I mean. Why you?" Hale looked at him, at the small figure wrapped in blankets and hope. Because I heard you," he said quietly. "And once I heard you, I wasn't going to stop until I found you." Liam didn't answer right away. He just stared at Hale with a depth far beyond his years, as if he were trying to understand the shape of safety for the first time. "Do you think," Liam whispered slowly, It'll stop hurting someday? The question landed softly but deeply, like a stone settling at the bottom of still water. Yes, Hale said, not all at once. Not suddenly, but slowly, like snow melting after winter. And I'll help you, every step. Liam blinked, tears forming, not from fear this time, but from something gentler, something allowed to exist now that he wasn't fighting to survive. Shadow lifted his head and nuzzled Liam's chin. The boy giggled, a tiny sound, almost lost, but Hale heard it. It was the first laugh. Quiet, shaky, but real. A beginning. Before bed, a nurse came in to discharge Liam, handing Hale a folder of instructions, medications, numbers. Hale signed the final papers, each signature tying him closer to the child he never expected to save. When they stepped outside the hospital, Liam's hand slipped into Hale's without hesitation. The small fingers were warm, no longer trembling. Shadow trotted beside them, proud and protective. Hale buckled Liam into the passenger seat. A soft blanket wrapped around him like a shield. The boy looked out the window at the peaceful snowfall, then at Hale. "A thank you," he whispered, "for finding me." Hale swallowed the emotion rising in his chest. "A thank you for holding on," he answered. As he drove them home, their home now, the world outside felt wider, brighter, softer than before. The snow no longer looked dangerous. It looked forgiving. Liam leaned his head against the window. Shadow curled at his feet, and Hale felt the quiet truth settle into him. Sometimes the family you save becomes the family you were given.